most important things that I would say to somebody that's coming up is if they, even if they're just outrageous, like they're one of these characters in the industry, if for some reason they're in a weird mindset and they feel like giving away the keys to the car without you asking for them, in the sense that they just get into a weird mood and they just want to talk about what they know about, who knows why?
Yeah.
If you don't have anything better to do, stop and listen.
Yeah.
Because you're probably going to be getting impression of what they have of their knowledge.
Yeah.
Because there's not a gratuity or some sort of connection to it, a goal or an outcome. Always find a way to be in those moments when they exist. Find a way to take 10 minutes and just be there for it.
Yeah.
If it's something you're passionate about, if it's a famous musician, like I remember this happening where I wasn't a musician per se, but I loved music. And I went and watched a concert, and then life is funny. Next thing I knew, we're backstage with the band and blah, blah, blah. And they were just talking to one guy in our group who they sort of knew, and they were catching up.
Yeah.
And it was like, I would never trade that moment of a story being told and what I learned for anything.
Huh.
You know, and it was because it was raw. Just being introduced to people consecutively. If you don't remember their name, you know, like, hey, this is Bob, this is Joe, this is Joanne, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
If you don't remember any of these people, ask yourself why that is. And the number one reason, that typically is the reason, is because we're so concerned about telling people who we are that our name replaces theirs.
Yeah.
So you're like, hi, I'm Derek, I'm Derek, I'm Derek. And they're giving you their name,
yeah.
right? So they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's good test. Because what you learn very quickly in that scenario, and it's human nature, is we get so used to trying to, you know, share ourselves that we have become almost completely numb to the information coming in. It's like, I just started practicing like de-emphasize self and emphasize others.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, if you can start to do that, all of a sudden it's amazing how much information is just out there for the taking. You know, just free information. You know?
And it's funny. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because you talked before about almost being a little bit selfish, but it's like the selfishness, if you want to call it that, comes in, you know, taking care of self first, and you know, like it's that self-love, right? Like you can't be good to others unless you're good to yourself, kind of thing. But then it kind of is on the reverse with what you're saying with situations like this. So it's kind of a fine line to try to walk.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. You know?
But I think it can be done. I think again, it goes back to taking that quiet time and actually listening internally versus looking for answers on the external, which I think, you know, that's what we're brought up doing, and that's all most people know is, you know, learn from schools, learn from TV, learn from, right, versus, you know, taking that quiet time and going inside and finding out, you know, what kind of person am I, you know, what are my needs, what are my wants. But then, like you said, taking that time to really connect with someone and see what they're all about too.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And like what you said, you know, with school, etc., and I think that's where it starts to stem from, you know, is we're programmed for competitive interjection, right? So the teacher is asking a question and people are competing to get their response.
Yeah.
And we're very much raised in a society that way, where competitive interjection of information. Your most humbling buddies, probably the guys that have no problem making fun of you on occasion. You have no problem poking a joke at them.
Yeah.
Sit them around a campfire and just let them interact. And there's always going to be one guy that's a bit more of a storyteller, one guy that's a bit more introverted.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that conversation will go in a circle around that campfire all night.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like they keep passing the conch, you know, and it's just one after the other. And then there's interjection, but for the most part, it's just this, you know, it's 1 out of 8 talks at a time.
Yeah,
and
it's flow. There's a flow to it.
Flow,
yeah.
You know, and I think people just lose that flow. For me, that's how I look at lecturing, you know? Like, when people ask me, like, how did I develop my lecture style?
Yeah.
It's, for the most part, I don't call it one-sided, but it's a majority-driven conversation. For me, it's always been that way.
Okay.
I try to present as much information as I can before I get a sense from the group that there's time for an interaction. Yeah. And I know it sounds really, like, intuitive and psychic, like metaphysical psychic sounding, but it really is that way. It's like I put out as much information as I can until I can sense that what I'm saying is slowing down.
Yeah.
And as I feel it, bring them back towards me.
Yep.
And it took me a while to figure out how to do that, and it took me a while to become really sensitive to it.
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's a muscle like everything else. Like when you talk about kind of metaphysical training, like in essence, I think we all have those kind of abilities. It's just tapping into them and learning about them and training them. And I believe wholeheartedly that, you know, like you're sensing an energetic off of the people that you're working with and tuning into that and making it work for you.
No, I agree 100%. I was once working with a Swedish doctor who had watched me speak, and the doctor had said, you know, you have this very interesting presence, and he was very honest, and he goes, even when you get a little bit excited, it's not uncomfortable. Like he said, it's just a weird energy. He goes, what do you do that creates that connection? And this was about 3 years ago. And it was a very candid moment. It just came out of me. And I was like, to be quite honest, I go, I'll tell you what my secret is for presentation. Because I perceive it as an exchange of energy. I don't perceive it as me giving you information and you taking it and storing it in your brain.
Yeah.
I don't think humans actually learn that way. I think we all learn differently. But I think it's literally more of an exchange of information energetically.
Yeah.
And I said, when I walk into a room, I learned along the way, I didn't want to be like some of these other presenters that you'll see in this industry. They walk into a room like they're John Wayne and they throw their stuff around and they create this like, oh my God, I better pay attention or I'm going to get this type of trouble, or wow, this guy's really overbearing. I'm subordinate. Do that. I've never been that way.
Yeah.
So it's not my personality. I've always been the kid that was a little bit bigger, so I always tried to be a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I didn't. It's just how it is.
Didn't scare people.
Right. Exactly. Right. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm a paley white, icy blue-eyed guy. That you know what I mean? Like that has a little bit harder looking facial expressions, and it's like I know that. I'm 37, so I'm aware of book by the cover appearance. I got tattoos. I'm a big guy. I know all these things.
Yeah.
And so, for me, even though that is only a representation of a part of my personality, it's when I get in front of people, it's a meditative thing that I start doing before I enter the room, and I see myself simply as a medium of information, because very little of what I say is truly information that somehow for the most part, it's my ability to take information, put the pieces of a puzzle together. I see myself as a conduit or medium of information. And so when I envision, and I do this, and I envision it, is I envision myself as like a center of energy in which a flow of water comes out of, and I literally project the image of water coming from myself and covering everything in my space so that everything is all one thing.
That's awesome.
And that's awesome. How I envision. When I feel very connected, I know that I'm doing that very well.
Yeah.
The meditative imagery part of it, I was very comfortable with. And it's just this, and to be quite honest, I feel less exhausted at the end of 30 hours of lecturing when I can keep that happening.
Well, yeah, it's like you're, in a lot of the training that I've done, we call it source. It's like you're tapping into source and letting it use you, and you're speaking from source. So yeah, like you're not being drained of energy because you're staying connected to the energy.
To the energy. Yeah. And you simply are a conduit.
Yeah. That's such a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, and some days when you get disconnected from it, man, I tell you what, it's like you crawl out of that week. That I pursued Reiki to try to start getting educated in energy work. I started to pursue a little bit into regression hypnosis when I was about 16 or 17.
Yeah.
Just intuitively thought it would be something I'd like to know about. My dad.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, my dad was a very much blue-collar lumber guy, but was really extremely well-read in like Edgar Cayce and extrasensualism and some of these other very obscure topics for small-town Canada. So I always had a little bit of, I always had an interest that there was a greater driving force of whatever, and I always say it this way because I believe in spirituality, so I leave religious denomination open to people's understanding.
Yeah.
But I always was driven by an idea of an energy spirituality. Man, I couldn't even tell you. It could be aliens for all I know. I don't know. Right? Like, I don't know the greater scheme of things, but I do know that to say that we start and stop within a physical existence of ourselves would be probably, in my opinion, one of the most arrogant things that we could say.
Yeah.
Say that we came from dust, we'll finish at dust, and nobody else was involved.
And sad.
It's
sad,
pretty,
right? Like, what sadder existence is there than being like, yeah, my life has no meaning. Like, I was born by accident and I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's one of the saddest things. Like, ways to think about things.
And you know what the thing is when people talk that way. Then there would be absolutely no people or person, and coming from a large family of this industry, in, say, police or firefighters, you would not have the instinct to throw yourself into harm's way to protect the longevity of another.
Yeah.
Like, you would never give your own life to prevail the life of another if it was simply on and off switches.
Yeah.
For instance.
Yeah.
Like, and people are like, there's no such thing as a spirit or a soul or a greater understanding. Say this to somebody that's willing to risk their life for another human.
Yeah.
Like, that makes you realize that there is a much deeper existence to why. Yeah, because if they just turn off and they turn to dust, then what difference does it make if I saved them or not?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Like, intrinsically, we know we can't be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you say to people that either don't get that or don't want to get that? Like, what? I mean, obviously you can't change how some people are, right? And some people will never understand it, or and I think it's fear based. It's like I'm not as big as the universe. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they're having a hard enough time controlling 9 to 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is control, I think, for a lot of people, myself included. I remember going through some very difficult times in my life where I cut that out of my life because I didn't have the energy to think about it.
Yeah.
So as simple as I can think is I became very focused on the here and now, because if I didn't focus on the here and now, it was too overwhelming.
You wouldn't get through it.
And, I couldn't get through it.
Yeah.
You know, ego-based at times, like children.
Yeah.
And when you get people that are that way, honestly, it doesn't make them bad people. It just means that for whatever point, if they come into your life at that time, then your job, in my opinion, is to try to correct as much of the world that they're involving you in.
Yeah.
So maybe it's health and longevity and strength, and just make them a stronger physical vessel, so that maybe they can make it further down the road of this path, so that they'll actually make it to that moment where they're going to have
kind of an aha moment or an awakening.
Yeah, a moment or awakening. Because, with the way that society is today, some of these people, they hit 35 to 40 and they start having heart attacks. That, I don't think, was how the system was developed.
No.
Okay, this is going to sort of be a strange way for me to describe it. But, there's a lot of people that are true fatalists, and they believe that if you die at 31 because of a heart attack because you lived on hamburgers, well, that's what you were supposed to do. I don't believe that.
No.
I believe that there is fate that intervenes at different times in our lives and gives us opportunities to make a decision. But I think that at any one time, there's a million decisions to be made off of one moment of fate.
Yeah.
And so what I think, and this is just my belief
almost
system,
like parallel universes.
Yeah, exactly. So the way I look at it is this. I lost a friend last year, and she was killed by a bad person that was breaking every possible law to inflict the outcome. And people will be like, well, it's just fate, it's how things happen. No, I think that we are on the earth making decisions. But I think when the concept of evil or bad choice or indiscretion occurs, I think that is still a choice on his part.
Sure.
The result of that choice then affected all these people.
Yeah.
I think that his karma, his soul, his existence will now be judged because of that choice.
Yeah.
I think when somebody comes in and they've lived on fucking cheeseburgers and booze and are going to have a heart attack at 40, they were given the opportunity not to have that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
They started to make choices.
Bad choices.
Opportunity for a life of enlightenment.
Yeah.
And I think when you get those people, they typically are very turned off mentally to that reality. It becomes you invest as much of your physical energy to strengthen their physical energy, so that maybe somewhere down the road they will have that realization.
Yeah.
And they'll realize that they're here for more than just a very superficial level of experiences. Having gone through that myself, where I've been in a situation where, I'll be very honest, a lucrative paycheck was determining my happiness in terms of career.
Yeah.
It can be very imprisoning, because the sense of security starts to override how bad you feel, how unappreciated you feel. Like, there's a lot of things that go with that. And when I'm dealing with those types of people, it's like when I'm coaching a young athlete. Like, I've had the 18-year-old athlete that comes into the office and tells me his girlfriend's pregnant. And what I always tell people is, like, when you start to administer advice from the most centered part of yourself, whatever wisdom that is that you currently have, it has to be done very, very slowly.
Yeah.
And what I typically used to find is I would first try to gain their trust in the physical world before I even began branch into their trust in the metaphysical existence of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, because what I've found is I don't want to ever stand behind somebody with a foot in their back pushing them into harm's way.
No.
I would rather have them believe so greatly in the cause that we're on that as I run over the hill, they're on my hip.
Yeah.
Like that's, and that's where if you can do your job well, and it's not just about leadership, it's about someone that inspires confidence. By default, we give that title leadership, but I don't think you always have to be a natural leader to have people follow.
Yeah, I agree.
I think people will follow somebody if their intent is genuine.
I agree. Yeah.
And they don't have to be the Patton-esque personality, but people will indeed travel down the path as long as they believe that what this person is doing is for improvement of everyone involved.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it goes back to just walking your own path, and if people, if that happens to light a way for other people, then they can choose to join you or not.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And listen, it's, and I'll be the first to admit this. Not everybody's going to like what I have to say.
No.
Not everybody's going to agree with what I have to say. And I used to worry about that.
Yeah.
It's as long as I'm not speaking with the intent to jeopardize the well-being of an undeserving person.
Yeah.
You know what? If someone agrees, they agree. If they don't, they don't. But as long as I'm being honest, or as honest as I'm able to be with the information that I have, if somebody wants to turn around and be like, I don't like that fucking guy because he says this, or I don't like that guy because he calls bullshit. There's nothing I can't. What can you do, right?
No, and that's
if your intent was right, and they still don't like you, then why change your intent to pick up the one person that doesn't, and
when so many others do,
the 50 that did?
Yeah. Yep.
But that's how people think, right? They almost would rather take that broken puzzle and fix it than keep helping those that are on board. Yeah, when you experience dramatic impact for the first time and it's not something you've had before, a lot of people look for external influence to be able to numb themselves. So you get people start drinking, they start using drugs, whatever. You're never going to make it through. You'll get by, but you, in my experience, will not make it through traumatic, life-altering experiences by yourself.
Agreed.
I think a lot of people think they can.
Yep.
You can't. I was surrounded by a really good group of guys that were on my team at that time.
Yeah.
And they knew when to show up. They knew what days to come around. And I think that's instrumental. My family was a long ways away. My brother and I were able to talk all the time on the phone.
Yeah.
It was important. But, that part of my life was separated, so that was tough. At the time, I was dating a girl that was extremely supportive. She was also an All-American level volleyball player. And so she could deal with how dramatic my emotions were at times because she knew what it meant.
Yeah.
But when I step back, and what all that simply means is that I had a support system.
It's that human connection again.
I had a human connection. I didn't feel like I was on an island. It is of the utmost importance that you force yourself into their life a little bit when they start to really withdraw. And when they start to go away, sometimes they need to go away just to recenter and to deal with some emotional garbage.
Yeah.
But if you start to see that it's becoming a change in personality or a change in habit, you have to bring them back out of that.
Yeah.
and it's not it's not an intervention. For me, it was simple. I can remember one time I had really withdrawn into myself, really got so inside my head about trying to focus on coming back from this injury that I realized it had probably been 3 weeks since I'd seen anybody from my team.
Oh, wow.
And that's a long time in college, right?
Yeah.
And next thing I knew, they were all at my door, and they were all going out to the bar. I didn't want to go, right? I didn't want, because I was into my new routine.
Yeah.
And I remember going. I can recall the entire evening perfectly. It was a very funny night, And I remember walking on my crutches back to my dorm room, and my one buddy Jason kept walking, and I couldn't quite figure out why he was still there. And I'm walking, and I'm like, all right, I'm getting on the elevator, and he's like, yeah, I know. He goes, they sent me in to make sure you got to your room. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he's like, all right, see you later. And he left. And at that moment, I realized, like, these guys had been sitting around worried about my well-being.
Yeah.
And from that moment forward, I let them back in because I realized how important they were. They were, like, only I was going to be able to deal with my injury. When you're looking at a rehab for me that was 9 months.
Yeah.
If you do that by yourself, you become so disconnected.
Yeah, no doubt, man.
And it doesn't matter what the rehab is. I don't care if it's someone that's going through AA. I don't care if it's someone that is coming off drugs or had a long military service and they're dealing with post-traumatic stresses. If you leave them to their own devices, what typically happens is you do start to have a tendency to only obsess about the
negative
part of it.
The negative.
The pain.
Yeah.
It's a strange human culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why we do it.
No. And I know a few people that are like that as well. And it's even something as simple as, maybe not simple, but where you're almost at a point in your life where you need to change careers or path, and I know a few people that are kind of remove themselves and distance themselves, like you said, and how is that helping the situation? It's like,
you know what? I really don't believe. I mean, we need other humans to perpetuate the human race on the most physical, basic, biological level.
Yeah.
That by default means that we are not supposed to spend our life alone.
Yeah.
And I'm a simple guy. Like it's like, if at the very least I need one other human in my life, at least for one day, then that means that I should never have spent my life isolated like a hermit.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing to be.
What
they don't realize is that long-term pathological pain that they get used to is so much worse.
Yeah.
I'd rather have my heart broke 1,000 times than live my entire life alone.
I agree.
Hands down.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, yeah, if something ends and you're in love, obviously it's going to hurt, but to go through that hurt and heal and have the opportunity to love again, like, I mean, there's maybe nothing more profound than connecting with another human being like that. And I'm with you 100%. I wouldn't like to shut yourself out from that. Like,
disaster.
Yeah.
Even if it's even when we meet these people nowadays with the Twitter, Facebook, they're there, but they're not really there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it becomes a sequential existence of one-day-long relationships, one-day-long friendships, and it's just after another. And you meet these guys, and they're in their late 30s, and they're just like these robotic shells of a human being.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what the fuck happened to you? It's like, how can you have gone through a life living in a city of 3 million people and be completely invisibly socially alone? But it's a human mechanism of protection, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You could grow up in a town like I did, have a guy go build a house in the woods and legitimately become a hermit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or you become a social hermit, which is basically a psychological equivalent,
Yeah.
right? They
Yep.
put up a giant wall around themselves, and
Yep.
physically they go through a social life, but psychologically they're completely a good friend of mine who's a tattoo artist, a guy that does all my tattoos, very honest. He keeps me very centered. He's a no bullshit, hard nosed guy, and he said something one time that really resonated with me, and he said that he remembers the first time he did a drawing that his father really liked and commended him on, and he realized that his dad's approval of that moment really drove him to master being an artist, because he realized from that point on, like every time he did a tattoo or did something, it was the admiration of the person getting it that he gave to him that drove that motivation to keep doing better art, to keep trying to create something that somebody someday would be so blown away by. And it started with his father. And I would say that my dad, who was actually quite a good athlete, was probably the first person, because I would hear these stories of like how much he enjoyed sports, and I was like, well, what if I got really good at sport? Then, he would tell me how great it was, and of course he did, and it spurred, and he became my greatest supporter, and all those good things. But then I realized, this goes back to the ego again. When I think back to when I was a kid trying to become an athlete, which eventually became my passion in my life, it was the attention. That was a big part of it. Like, I wanted to be so successful that, like, I used to sit when I was a kid, and I used to picture myself on the fucking Tonight Show. The Tonight Show. And I used to pretend that I was having an interview with Jay Leno when he first took it over. And because I figured if I did that, that meant that I was so good at something that people couldn't ignore me.
Yeah.
Right? Fuck, he must be really good if he's on the Tonight Show. and it's funny how that is, but it really, that was a big motivator for me. And it's probably only been in the last few years, I would say maybe since motivation now, it's like, I'll tell you what, when a course is done and I can see people are really charged up about what they feel they learned from it, and that experience, that's still the motivation. It's that the sense of if I was a stand-up comedian, it would probably be the applause at the end of the show.
Yeah.
The crowd going crazy, like the idea that I could drive people to change a path in their life. And I used to really have a hard time talking about it because it made me feel like I was a total arrogant asshole. But then I sort of stepped back one day and I realized that was the very thing that used to get me excited to go listen or watch somebody else.
Yeah.
And seeing them just explode this passion on you, and you're like, Jesus, fuck, this guy just blew my hair back. It made me want to go out and try to do that and share that.
Yeah.
That's what motivated me.
That's
and
awesome.
That's when I finally accepted that, is the simple fact that there is a part of me that gets moment of wonderment and awe.
Yeah.
That's it. I would like to say it was much more, maybe when I'm 60, I'll be like, well, teaching and sharing the wisdom of existence. No, man, I like the moment of the holy shit, that was an amazing moment.
Yeah.
I love that. I love hearing it. I love watching it. I love being the guy saying it. It's I don't care how it happens. I want to be a part of it. You see some of these moments on ESPN or when you see that interaction where somebody has super exceeded the human experience and it's caught on film. It makes me extremely emotional.
Yeah.
I realize that that's what drives me. And it doesn't matter what side of that relationship I'm on. It doesn't matter if I'm the one presenting it or I'm the one hearing it.
Yeah.
I just love that moment.
That's amazing.
I love it, and I think that's probably my greatest motivating factor. You know, and if I get to stand in front of a group of 30 people in Hong Kong in April and do that to people, and then knowing that they're going to take that and probably do that to someone else in some other way, or one of those people will have that moment, amazing to me. It's an amazing idea.
It's just, I think it's almost like the root of inspiration. It's like that. You're inspiring others to go and inspire others who are going to inspire, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and like when I think of my lineage of coaching and the people that have inspired me, man, I tell you what, like, if they only knew, you know? And it wasn't always the big moments. Sometimes it was the subtle stuff that just leaves that imprint.